Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Behind the Visual. I'm your host, lifestyle and advertising photographer Mark Hansen, and this is the podcast where I interview all those people responsible for everything you see out in the world. These people help make it all, and today my guest is Bernie Hogya. Bernie is a creative director and an art director, and he worked on the Got Milk campaign. So if you've ever wondered how the Got Milk campaign was started, or what it was like to work with celebrities and celebrity photographers who helped make that campaign, Bernie can tell you all about it because he was there from the beginning all the way to the last frame. And the campaign reversed a 30-year decline in milk sales and became a popular cultural phenomenon. In his career, Bernie has worked with celebrities like Taylor Swift, Elton John, Van Halen, Tom Brady, Steven Tyler, Harrison Ford, The Rock, and dude, just about everybody else you can think of pretty much. He's also worked with photographers, major photographers like Annie Liebowitz, Richard Avedon, David LaChapelle, Herb Ritz, and a whole lot more of those guys as well, and women. Bernie is one of the elites when it comes to being an art director and creative director. He's where probably every art director and creative director wants to be at some point in their career. He also led the creative on the Foundation for a Better Life, and which was cited by the OAAA as the most successful public service campaign in the history of outdoor advertising. So he's had some major accomplishments. So during this podcast, we discuss all of that kind of stuff. We also discuss his band in high school, which was evidently the very first Kiss tribute band. We discussed how he started out working at Marvel Comics and he hid some things on the pages when he was working at Marvel Comics. So if you have some of those comic books that he worked on, there's some hidden things in the pages. He'll tell you about that. We also talk about how he got Annie Liebowitz to sign on to be the very first Got Milk photographer before anybody else even really knew what it was and had agreed to do it yet. So she agreed to do it, and we'll tell you how he got her to do that. We'll also discuss Annie's process for shoots, so you guys will get some behind the scenes on how she works and what she's like to work with behind the scenes. She's got some great advice for up and coming art directors and really anybody. The advice will probably should work for basically everybody, but it's really great for art directors. And we talk about what he's doing now. And there's so much more. There's some really great stories in this thing. I think you guys are really going to love this one. So take a listen. Let me know what you think. Be sure to like it, share it, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. And here we go. Can't wait for you to hear this one.
As a photographer, your skill set in communication has to be vast because I work with so many great photographers and there's lots of different techniques. But being able to talk to people, getting them relaxed, and off guard is kind of the trick. You don't want people because everybody has experience being in front of a camera. From when you're a little kid, smile, say cheese. Everybody has experience in front of a camera. And so when you hold a camera up, people do their thing.
Yeah.
And the one thing you don't want them to do is their thing. You want to catch them not doing their thing.
Absolutely.
I've worked with Liebowitz so many times, and she had a thing where she would call it breaking them.
Yeah.
And remember, when you're shooting only celebrities, famous people. She shoots not famous people too. But when you're shooting a lot of famous people
Right.
who've been photographed a million times, and your task is to take a picture. At least in her mind, her task was to take a picture that had never been taken before of this person who had been shot a million times. And so the one thing you need to do is you need to get them out of their thing, what they do. And to find it, you have to really work hard at it because you're trying to take a picture that nobody's taken before.
Yeah.
And, we were shooting somebody one time, Miranda Lambert, I think it was.
Yeah.
A very pretty, country singer, and she does her thing, and Annie was very, very perplexed by it because the more she shot, the more she talked about, how to me, that she wasn't getting it. She was doing her thing. She was looking to Miranda Lambert, being Miranda Lambert. And at some point, it was like she was just working her. And that's not her thing. Her thing is to shoot fast and just say, we're done. I think we have it, But some of them are tougher because, you're shooting somebody who doesn't necessarily want to show themselves,
Yeah.
And then at one point, I think she was just so tired of being there, Miranda, that she just like gave up on the thing. And Annie clicked the shutter a couple of times and turned to me and she said, I did it. I broke her.
Wow. That's a
Yeah.
great story.
Yeah. And she was just, I think she was fed up, basically.
Oh, well, that's a good trick. I'm gonna have to remember that. If they
Yeah,
just
she gave her a
keep doing
look
it, just
like,
keep
how
pushing
long
and
are we going
pushing
to
and
do this? And
pushing.
that was the picture.
There was a story I heard years, and I cannot, for the life of me, I cannot remember who the photographer was, but he was some, one of the top 1% of the 1% of photographers in the world at the time. And I'm just blanking on his name, but he was shooting, I think, some royalty over in England, the Royals. And he walked in and he knew they were prepared and they were going to do their whole little stiff kind of smile thing. So he walked in and had his camera all set up and he started telling him a story. And he told him a story about how on the way there, a dog ran out in front of his car. He knew they were dog lovers. He said, a dog ran out in front of my car and I hit the dog and
Mm.
killed it. And he said, and when he said that, they reacted and he immediately hit the shutter, got the
Yeah.
shot.
Yeah, another approach, and I worked with Avedon as well, not on milk, but on another assignment. I was very lucky as an art director. We could talk about this, but I've worked with so many great, talented people, and it's been real thrill. Like for
Yeah,
me, it's almost like the icing on the cake to rub shoulders with these great people. But I
absolutely.
work with Avedon, and you watch interviews with Avedon. He was so remarkable as a conversationalist. And
That's what
his
I've
trick
heard.
wasn't to break people. His trick was to get people so relaxed in a conversation that he would, he's standing, he's got his little studio in his house, and you walk into this sort of shotgun, beautiful brownstone, and you walk all the way back, 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 and then the back of it, he's got a sight wall, built into his like the back of his, his like
Okay.
and a little doorway, like an 1800s house would have, a little
Oh
doorway,
yeah.
and in there is the cyc wall, and all the lights are set up. And in the door frame, he puts his 8x10 camera. So basically, when you're standing in there and you're looking out, you're seeing this like rectangle and the camera and Avedon, and uh, and he doesn't look through it because he's got that worked out, right? He's
Yeah.
set it up. Stands there with the shutter,
Yeah. The remote will click.
the
Yeah.
cord, and talks, and every now and then would click, and then he has a guy standing off, side of the hole,
Yeah.
with the loaded 8x10 sheets, and as soon as the click would go off, he would go in, flip the thing around and flip the thing, and just like it became like that's why his photographs are so remarkable because they're very, very
Yeah.
unrehearsed. They almost look, his pictures are like people like doing this or wiping their brow or like turning sideways or looking uncomfortable or ashamed or whatever. Like it's a remarkable thing. But if you watch interviews with him, you'll see he's a fantastic conversationalist. He tells stories like he's not a photographer, but like he's a journalist or something. He has such an amazing ability to be a raconteur. Raconteur, is that the word? Raconteur. He just talks, 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 and it's all very interesting. Really cool. And Annie didn't do that. Like, and she actually once told me that she admired his ability to do that, to relax a subject in that manner.
I'm sure.
And because she didn't have that skill set, she had different skill sets,
Right.
obviously. But the idea that you can get somebody to give you their soul by getting into their head, like we're not taking your photograph.
Yeah. Yeah. I read his book or one of the books about him. I think it was his longtime manager had written it and just said a lot of the same stuff. I hadn't heard it put that way that you put it,
Yeah.
which makes even more sense than what I heard
Yeah, there
before.
was a great story I heard of him where he was like, he was walking through Central Park, and there was a guy in Central Park who was selling like buttons. He would take a picture with a Polaroid, and he would put it into a button, you
Oh,
know.
yeah.
And this was I think in the New York Times Magazine or something. This story, and it might have been after he passed away. But anyway, so Avedon was walking by and he's fascinated by this because, like, people like stopping by, he's taking pictures, whatever. He's like, let me check this out. He took the camera and he was taking some pictures and they're putting him in the button. So some people that day got
Holy
Avedon
crap.
portraits in their
Really?
little button, but
And they probably had no idea. They probably
not for
thought it
like
was just
50
some,
cents, and he thought
yeah.
he could throw it in the box. But it was a really cool story because he was so fascinated by what was going on, like instant portraits kind of thing, putting him into buttons, people walking around
Yeah.
the park with their faces on them.
That's very cool. God, I wish I'd been walking through Central Park at that
Yeah,
time.
no kidding. And it's funny, in my career, because I've been very, very like careful about working with celebrities, working with great photographers, being on sets, having that privilege
Yeah.
of doing that. You learn real fast that you have to be on the team. You have to be an insider because a lot of these people, on the milk thing, we worked with the biggest stars in the world,
Yeah.
Elton John and Muhammad Ali, and name them, we did them,
Right.
and these people are not up for any foolishness. And
Hmm.
so, regardless of your human, interest in meeting, a great sports legend or a great musician or a great actor, you've got to sort of temper it because as soon as they know that you're not in on it, then you're sort of like an outsider. Now you're not part of the team. And it's like because everything they do is surrounded by people who do it,
Right.
you know, and you're coming into it as as an art director, not being in that box. And so you have to be very careful about not not getting outside of that and asking for an autograph or doing something silly,
Right.
I take a picture kind of thing. You just don't do it. And so because of that, like I don't have any, I never asked Annie to take my picture. Like that would be
Right.
so crazy. Like
Yeah.
you would never do it because it would be automatically you would be a jerk,
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah.
and
I
then it would be
was
like, oh,
listening to
that guy's such an
something.
idiot.
There's
Yeah.
something the other day I was listening to, and somebody did something like that.
Yeah.
And it immediately turned off whoever the celebrity was, their handler, the art director, creative director, and I think somebody below had asked that, and they did it, but that was it. They
Yeah.
never worked with them again, because
Yeah,
they
I had
did
I had
that.
little kids. I had a couple of girls, and when the milk thing was really happening, and the first year or two, we were just doing adult women. It was kind of like a targeted thing. Like there was no advertising, and then we were creating a campaign. I will get into that how we started it, but this is just an inside story about like being on the team, as it were. So I had daughters, and they were young daughters, and we started shooting teenage idols and musicians, and like everybody who was happening. Like if Backstreet Boys had a number one song, we were shooting the Backstreet Boys.
Right.
Britney Spears, we were shooting Britney Spears. We were shooting Taylor Swift before she had her first single. So it's like
Wow.
all of that stuff was going on, and my kids, I wasn't going to come home from Taylor Swift and not bring an autograph,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I wasn't asking for it. So I would ask like the producer or something, hey, give me a couple of signed CDs or
That's
something.
smart.
Yeah, because I still want to be the cool guy who doesn't want to be fawning over people, but at the same time, for my kids, it was like it was like if I was a kid and
Oh
my
yeah.
dad had a chance to work with the Beatles. Like if he came home
Absolutely.
without an autograph, I would be like, I wouldn't talk to him for a year.
Yeah, like, hey, come on.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I
anyway,
get
how do
that.
you start? Where do you want to start?
Oh, I think I'm going to take some of that if you're okay and put it in
No, I
there.
mean like when
But
you're
yeah,
doing these
but
things,
yeah, well, let me ask you one question real quick on that stuff. Was there anybody you ever worked with that you were just like, wow, I can't believe I'm getting ready to work with either this photographer or this celebrity that you were excited about, but you had to keep it kind of calm?
well, I mean, because I'm in the business as an art
Yeah,
director, all of those great photographers were remarkable
I'm
to work
sure.
shoulders. Annie Avedon, David LaChapelle. I worked a lot with him. Remarkable photographer too. But like Herb Ritz, all these guys. You know, uh, Even modern photographers, Rankin. Some of the great photographers. And I've had a very privileged time in advertising because I did a lot of this. And that's one thing. And then the other side of it is, yeah, huge celebrities, big fans of people.
Yeah,
I was a creative kid, like a lot of people in this business. I don't know, if you play a musical instrument.
yeah. I play guitar.
Yeah, really, I play guitar too.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. So when you're creative, when you jumped out of the womb and you're like, you're struggling to figure out what you're doing. Every kid plays with Play-Doh. Every kid
Yep.
has a set of crayons. Every kid starts with the tools,
Right.
right? But some kids stop. The
Yeah.
creative people, they keep going,
Yeah.
right? So like you get to that age where like, okay, I can't color anymore. The Play-Doh's, dried up. It's under the couch. You're looking for something else. And so like I drew,
Yeah, I
I
did
played
too.
an instrument. You're looking for some creative outlet. You don't know yet, but that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
I find that a lot of people in advertising on the art side and even on the copy side, did play in bands. They did have, things because you're trying to figure out how I'm going to channel this thing that got in me on the side of my brain that's clicking differently than everybody else's. And so I did all of that. And so played in bands in high school and college, and then my art also, that played a role as well. But I first, after once I got to an age where I can start making money doing something, I was playing in bands. We were making a lot of money,
Yeah.
and we actually, you know, I'm from Sayreville, New Jersey, which is famous for being where John Bon Jovi is
Right.
from. And he
Yep.
went to the same school I went to. He was a few years younger than me. But my band in Sayreville had a little bit of like a brush with fame too, because the band was named Mortimer Snurd. Now there's
Mortimer
a
Snurd.
yeah. Now there's a Charlie McCarthy, connection. Charlie McCarthy, who was Edgar Bergen's dummy from the 40s.
Yeah.
His stupid dopey brother was named Mortimer Snurd. And so
Okay.
we named ourselves Mortimer Snurd because we liked the band Jethro Tull. And we thought, oh, that's kind of a funny name. Let's find a funny name. And so we were doing a show when we were in high school. I'm at the junior high for Halloween. And this was in 1974, I think.
Okay.
And we had just seen Kiss
Oh
on a
wow.
TV show called Don Kirshner's Rock Concert.
Yeah, I've
And
heard of it. I
something
never
on
saw
late
it,
at
but I've
night.
heard of it.
Yeah, and bands would go on and play live. And we had never seen Kiss perform live. And there was Kiss, right?
Yeah.
Odds, fire, blood, everything. And
Yeah.
so we were doing this show in a couple of weeks. And we were like, what we ought to do for Halloween? Let's dress up as Kiss. We made costumes. We actually went to a magic shop and got some flash pods. Our bass player had some blood capsules. He spit blood. We did the
Oh
whole thing.
wow.
And so many, many, many years later, decades later, a friend of mine who his name is Ken Sharp. He's the Kiss historian. He writes all the
Really?
Kiss books and he works with them on their history. I was telling him this story, and he goes, what year was that? And I said it was 1974. He goes, I think you guys were the first band to ever dress up as Kiss and play. I think you were the first Kiss tribute band. I'm like, get out of here. He's like, no, no, no. Nobody ever thought of it until like it wasn't a thing in
Yeah.
74. Kiss was barely Kiss in
Right.
74, And
That's
so
cool.
he went to Paul Stanley and asked him about it. And he was like, yeah, these guys must have done it first. And so they did a big story on my high school band on Kiss Online about Mortimer
Really?
Snerd. And there's actually a website, mortimersnerd.com, if you want to go check it out. See pictures
Okay.
of me when I was a kid. But you can hear some music and listen to our crazy story about being the first Kiss tribute band. So to
That's
your
cool.
story about people who, you were a little bit like freaked out about shooting. Kiss, the
Yeah.
original Kiss, in full costume when they
Wow.
reunited. So it was all four of them, Ace and Peter Chris and Gene and Paul Stanley, and in full, Kiss regalia. I said that was pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And so like stuff like that, or like Eddie Van Halen, shooting Eddie and his brother. Um, I went to see Van Halen from the nosebleed seats in Madison Square Garden,
Yeah.
and I was in a room with Eddie Van Halen, and he was bringing in guitars because Annie asked him to bring some guitars. And I knew at the time that he was like an inventor of guitar stuff. He was like a Thomas Edison of guitars.
Yeah.
And I guess Van Halen had a bunch of songs in the key of D, right? So he's playing D chords, and
Yep.
he liked to take his low E for people who are not musically inclined
Right. Yeah.
and tune it down a whole step to D. So you get that bong, that big D
Hmm.
on the bottom of his guitar. And he was doing it all the time because he did a lot of songs where he wanted to have that E and D. And so he invented a thing that he would pull this little peg on the E string and it would drop the E down to a D. And then when he was done with that song, you pull it back and it would pull it back up to an E.
Oh
And so
wow.
it's on all of the Wolfgang guitars that they make now.
Really?
And it's a D drop, it drops the
Yeah.
E to a
Yeah.
D.
Yeah.
And so he has his guitars there, and I had heard about this at the time. And so yeah, you invented a little thing for your guitar. This I read about this, and oh, you play guitar? And I go, not to you, I don't. And so no, 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 I don't want to be a jerk. He says, if you play guitar, I'll show you my guitars. And I was like, oh yeah, I
Oh.
play. He goes, oh, let me show you. So he's got a couple of guitars. He opens up one case and he hands it to me. I'm sitting on a little, folding chair. He hands me the guitar. He opens up another case. He pulls a folding chair over to me, and he sits down with his. I'm sitting knee to knee with Eddie Van Halen, and we both have guitars.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
So Larry,
crazy.
well, what a story, right? For a guy who grew up playing guitar, right? So
Yeah, that's
yeah,
amazing.
incredible, right? I didn't do anything other than just maybe embarrass myself, but I noodled a little bit.
Dude, whatever. I
It
mean,
was noodle in a different
even
way,
if I'm just sitting there just like strumming like three chords,
No, I
if
don't.
I'm with
He
Eddie
was
Van
so
Halen,
cool.
I'd be
He
happy.
was so totally cool that I talk about like making people feel comfortable, the Avedon story. He was so totally cool that he had this crazy pick, and it was a piece of metal. They had punches in it, hole punches in it. And I said that's a really crazy pick. And he goes, yeah, I got this guy in Mexico who makes them for me. And he goes, here, take a look. And it was really amazing. Like I never seen anything like that. Like when you go
Yeah,
on eBay or whatever and look for a Van Halen pick, you don't see that. You see
right.
like these souvenir, Fender picks with Eddie Van Halen's signature on it or
Yeah,
whatever that
yep.
he never touched. The roadies, pass them out to the fans after the shows. But this was a real thing. And he was so nice. I'm telling you, he was so nice and so sweet and so wonderful, Mark. I tell you, I said, I'm looking at this thing and I go, can I have this? I go, can I have this? And man, I've only got one with me, but if I had more, I'd give you one. I'm like,
Wow,
oh,
that's
I'm
cool,
like, what an
man.
idiot. Can I have
Hey,
this?
you know what?
And
Shoot
he
your
was
shot.
so sweet and so wonderful. And then like a year or so afterwards, he and his brother sent me an autographed big blow up of the ad. Thanks. Hey, we had fun, whatever, something.
Oh,
So
that's
we got a lot of
great,
that kind of
man.
stuff. But that's not like that's not a normal course of being an art director. But yeah, the musicians really, those are the ones that maybe swoon the most.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then also, I grew up being a big fan of movies in Hollywood and movie stars, right?
Yeah.
So like it's not a big deal for me to take a photograph of, somebody who's on a TV series or whatever, but I'm shooting like Lauren McCall, something like that. And
Yeah.
like, that's pretty amazing. I mean,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
amazing. And so how can you not be like, like have your breath taken away by
No
meeting Lauren
kidding.
McCall? So yeah, it's a very, very charmed life for somebody in this business. And the testament to the success of the campaign is the sugar on top of the job that I had to do. I used to give presentations on the campaign to students and stuff. And in part of the presentation, I would say to them, I would say, when you watch a movie and you see Tom Hanks, or somebody like that in a movie, they want to give him a cool job, so they put him in advertising,
Right.
right? Because it's cool, right? They make him like art director in advertising, right?
Yeah.
And so, here's a great example of that. Mel Gibson, right? You've
Yeah.
seen the movie where he can read women's
Oh, yeah.
minds,
It's like what women want or something like
what
that.
women want. And so they're making this movie, and they contact the agency, and they say to them, "Hey, listen, we're doing this movie about advertising, and we got Mel Gibson, and he's going to be a creative director, and we need to have some ads to put around the office. And so, could we have some of your milk ads, sent over, blow-ups of them, whatever, put them around the office. If you're watching a movie, you can see them in the movie. But so afterwards, I was telling people, I said, I got this crazy news. They go, what? He goes, Mel Gibson is playing me in a movie. He's a creative director. He's going to have milk ads at his office.
I love that.
Yeah, but anyway, I would tell kids. I said, when you see these movies and it's always like the cool job. I said, if you get to be so lucky as to become, an art director in advertising, or a copywriter in advertising, your big assignment might be taking a picture of a shoe.
Yeah.
Your big assignment might be coming up for another way to say crunchy,
Mhm.
and those are cool plum assignments. I said, but you're not going to do what I do.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you right now, because I do what the guys on those movies do. I'm like jet setting. I'm flying all around the world. I'm working with celebrities. I've got the high life. And I'm working on famous work that everybody knows. You worry about like, when you do stuff and the joke is always like my mother doesn't know what I do, especially
Right.
as an art director. Okay, there's
Yeah.
no way to explain it. And somebody one time, a great art director told us, I don't know who it was, but it was like, trying to explain to the mother what an art director does. And it's like, oh, look at this. And showing him an ad. Oh, this is fantastic. Did you take this photograph? No, no, I didn't take the photograph. Oh, did you write the headline? No, I didn't write the headline. He goes, what did you do? Well, I worked with the photographer and I worked with the copywriter and I made the ad. It's like,
Right.
you to do anything. Yeah, it's a crazy thing, but it's like, the job is having the taste to bring those people together,
Right.
but it's also to have the responsibility and the vision to make it all come to life. And it's really a lot of work.
Oh, yeah,
And it's a lot of
absolutely.
responsibility. And when you're doing this at this level of like, the biggest stars on the biggest campaign, I created the campaign with my copywriting partner whose name was Jennifer Gold Mance. The two of us came up with this idea from a blank piece of paper. And Mantz, if you want to look her
Mhm.
up. But if you think about, the struggle of coming up with an idea, selling the idea, and then bringing it to life, it's kind of difficult, And so the startup on this whole milk thing was that, we had a bunch of teams working on it. It was a big assignment, you know. It's funny because when we got the assignment at the agency, um, we had just come back from the one show the night before. And at the one show, the Aaron Burr commercial for Got Milk for California's milk processors just won everything. It won Best of Show and whatever.
Okay.
And it was just for California. And the agency that I worked for at the time, Bozell was the agency. They had some success with putting together groups of advertisers for one cause. It started with they were the agency for Chrysler. And the way it worked with Chrysler is that there was a national campaign that Chrysler, would fund. And then all of the dealers that benefited from the advertising would put money into a hat to create a bigger fund
Okay.
to support more advertising, right? And so that was what that agency did. Bozell worked on Chrysler and did that. And the guy who ran the place, Chuck Peebler was his name. He's also a very famous ad guy. He was thinking like, what else can we do like this? Like 'cause this is a pretty cool idea. We may not be able to find a big enough client. They did American Airlines and a bunch of other giant clients, but there weren't that many giant clients up for grabs. So we're like, let's
Right.
create something. Like, what can we do? Like, what can we do something like Chrysler, where we get a bunch of people together who have small budgets, put them together and make a bigger budget. And so they thought about commodities because commodities aren't brands. They're
Right.
just everybody all around the country in regional areas have their own thing. But nationally, they're kind of getting killed by the people who have a national account. And so they thought about pork, because it's a main staple of people's households, but there's no pork advertising. So
Yeah.
what they did is they went throughout the country, Chuck Biebler and his team, around the country, and they locked in pork producers to say, if you put in money, we can make a national pork campaign. And then all of a sudden people will be in the local supermarket and they'll see pork and they'll go, oh, that's the thing I saw in the commercial. There's no pork advertising. Nobody
Right.
has enough money to make a pork commercial.
Yeah.
So they created this pork the other white meat, which
Yeah.
which was their campaign. And so with the success of that, he was like, what else could we do? And he was like, milk. You know, milk in New Jersey, there's a dairy. There might be 5 dairies in New Jersey, depending on where you live. Like North Jersey, Central Jersey, South Jersey,
Right.
West Jersey. You go into a Quick Check somewhere or a Wawa somewhere, and whatever brand is in the cooler is that local brand. There's no there wasn't a national brand at the time. Right now there is a national brand or two, but there wasn't a national brand. It was just your local dairy making that milk or bottling that milk. Um, so what they did is they went around the country and they tried to lock up processors into the same thing. And California was the only one who said, we already have a campaign, this Got Milk thing.
Right.
And it was only done in California. Like you wouldn't see Got Milk anywhere else. We would go to California and the campaign started, it was television and billboards. That was it. There was never any print ads, it was just television and billboards. And so they locked up 49 states to do a milk campaign. And they needed something different, than what they were doing in California, and something different than what they were doing on the guys who owned the cows side, the dairy farmers side, which was milk it does a body good, which
Right.
is stuff
Yeah.
that we heard for years when we were growing up. So they needed something else, but it was going to be a government, run program because milk is a commodity and it needed like government overseeing oversight.
Right.
And so they wanted it to be educational. In fact, the joke of it is that in our brief for this milk campaign was the food pyramid. It was actually in the brief.
Really?
Yeah, like, what are we going to do with this?
Right.
They were really looking for an educational campaign that just said, "Hey, milk has calcium. Milk is good for
Oh,
bones."
yeah.
Like, and that was supposed to be the campaign. And so, it was a big assignment for the agency because unlike California, which had small amount of money, all 49 states put together was a gigantic amount of money. It was
I
a
bet.
huge amount of money. It was a gigantic amount of money, $100 million, $150 million. It was something like it was giant. And so they put like the whole agency on it, a lot of teams, and there were your campaigns that had pictures of skeletons and pictures of cows and whatever, and then you had our thing, which is celebrities with long mustaches, you
So
know.
where did that idea come from? Were you guys,
Um,
I mean, you see the commercial like years ago for the Budweiser is like the everybody Budweiser or in the
yeah,
agency and they're like, oh hell, let's do that with frogs or whatever it
yeah.
was. So where did the whole milk mustache thing come from?
It was really just kicking it around, and you know, uh, Jennifer, the copywriter, had a younger brother, and she was talking about how it always used to make her laugh when her brother would get a milk mustache,
Right, okay, yeah.
you know, and that kind of thing. This is what's cool about creative. That's a conversation you're having because you're working on something. You don't sit down and just work on it. You sort of like do other stuff and you have conversations and we're working on it, but you're going to the
Right,
movie, whatever, you're in your backyard and you're talking. And when something like that comes out, it could just easily go out. Like it could become, it's just a nothing. Somebody just saying nothing. But you write stuff down. And then when you're then building it, you go back to it and you go, what, this milk mustache thing? What? And we started out thinking about like, just people with milk mustaches because it's kind of funny. And
right.
it is funny to see, and that's why people laugh at it. Hey, milk mustache.
Yeah.
But now they go, hey, got milk. But in the old days, well, yeah, milk mustache. But the reason why it's so funny is because it's just the same thing that happens when you go into like the subway and somebody blacks out a tooth on a model's face or puts a
Right,
mustache on somebody. It makes you look because it's not supposed to be there. It
right,
sort of calls your attention to it, right? So the mustache is the same thing. It's not supposed to be there, and it's sort of like it. You go, oh, ha, ha, something's on your face. And so we went from that to like, maybe we could put some famous people in there, whatever too. And it was like we weren't sure exactly how it was going to go, and then eventually we got down to it should just be famous people. That would be the greatest thing, just famous people. And when we presented these ideas to the client. Um, the milk mustache was one of like five things presented, you know,
oh,
and
wow.
to the client's you know, greatness, they picked the milk mustache one. Now you never know what's going to happen in those situations. Some agencies have the balls to say we're only taking our best idea, and they don't bring anything else because always
Right,
there's always a chance that they pick something you don't want them to pick.
right.
But in this case, I don't even think the agency knew that we had the best idea. I think the agency thought all of them were good ideas. Now, of course, everybody took credit for, the
Of
success.
course, yeah.
At the beginning, it was our idea.
Yeah,
It was one of a bunch of things. But yeah, to the client's great, strength, they said this was the idea, and they were such incredible partners because through the whole ride, until they got really popular, they really had a hands-off creative policy. Like we did what we wanted to do, and that's why it was so amazing. The the beginning of the campaign, our executive creative director didn't want to run into roadblocks with people who were busy, celebrities, not wanting to pose for a photograph or not having the time to do it.
right.
And so he was adamant that we use stock photos. And I was equally adamant that would ruin the campaign
Yeah,
because the whole fun of it was going to be seeing mustaches on real people, not just. And at the
right.
time, this was 1995. There was retouching, but not that great.
Yeah,
It would have looked a little weird. In fact, a lot of people thought we applied it, but we didn't. That we thought they retouched it, but we didn't. So we were going down the road of doing this because they didn't have a lot of money for celebrity endorsements. And this was during the time that, like, you would get, $5 million to be in a commercial. Like there was a lot of money being spent by Coke and Pepsi.
Oh, yeah.
Our, Milk's prime, competition were the soft drinks. We're trying to get share
Oh,
of
wow.
stomach,
Yeah.
so it's like, people thought that milk was for kids. When they became adults, they don't drink milk anymore.
Right.
Whereas milk was like the superfood. It had like everything in it. And so people would not drink milk, and we had to convince them that there was good reasons to drink it. So there was an educational component, and the real heart of the idea was that there are surprising things you don't know about milk, and there are surprising people you don't know are drinking it, who are drinking it. And so that was the connection between the nugget of information and the person with the mustache. And so at the very beginning, it wasn't about who do you think is drinking milk? Let's pick them. It was like, who do you think is not drinking milk? Let's pick them.
Right.
So we were shooting like, Kate Moss naked, with a glass of milk.
Yeah.
Dennis Rodman, people who are like, there's no way these are milk spokespeople, but they're
Who was
drinking milk.
who was your first one? Who was the very first person you shot?
We did five at the beginning.
Okay.
We launched with five. But let me get before you get into that.
Yeah.
So we're going down the road of stock photography,
Mhm.
and we were literally like weeks before we were going to have to, call the stock photography option and just start contacting people and saying, "Don't worry, we don't need any of your time. We're going to pay you 25 grand." That was the money that they had, 25 grand. We're going to pay you 25 grand, even if you're, the biggest star in the world and you're used to $15 million. We're going to need $25,000, and you don't have to do anything. Just sign this contract, and we'll get a stock picture, and it'll be fantastic. Don't have to do anything. At the last minute, I went to my art buyer, and I said, I gotta ask somebody if they would shoot this before we go down this road. And they're like, "Oh, you want to do photography?" And I just want to see what's going to happen. And they go, "Well, who do you want to ask?" I said, "I want to ask Annie Liebowitz." Now, she was
Okay.
like, "You're joking." I said, "No, I'm not joking." She's like, "There's no way." At the time, she's only done 2 campaigns. So she was the biggest photographer in the world then, probably still is today. She had only done The Gap and American Express. And they were both really well heralded campaigns,
Mhm.
very, very beautiful. She got to do her thing,
Yeah.
and nobody interfered with it. And so that's sort of like her, her way of working is that I'm a photographer, and I'm not an advertising, illustrator. I'm a photographer.
Right.
And so there's rules about working with Annie Liebowitz. I said, "Well, just ask." When she says no, I can sleep. Then I don't have to worry about it. Because in the back of my mind, I'm like, Annie Liebowitz, she'd be so great with this. Oh. And so he calls over, sends over some comps that I put together. And she calls me in her office. She says, "You're not going to believe it, but I heard back from Leibovitz's studio." She said that not only does she want to do it, she wants to make sure nobody else gets the chance to do it. That she wants
Really?
to. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And so I had a lot of fight to go through to get her approved, because the executive creative director would not let me do it. He thought it was a big mistake. He thought it was going to kill the campaign. He thought nobody was going to want to do it. And my point was the opposite. We're shooting a year at least to start of beautiful women, supermodels, 2.5 to 4 hours of hair and makeup, and then we're going to put a mustache on them. Who wants to do that? Like what? And there hasn't been a milk mustache ad yet.
Right.
So they don't know what it's going to be. It could be a big, destruction of my career to do this stupid
Right.
idea, But Annie Liebowitz is taking the photograph, and then it's like, oh,
Yeah.
well that can't be bad, right? Like you're talking
Right.
about with the agent, like, well, this could be good, right?
So everybody who
You're
would
still
have
not
said
sure,
no
but
is now saying yes.
yeah, but now you're in front of Annie Leibovitz's camera, and
Right.
it's a whole different thing. And so we were able to keep that $25,000 per celebrity true for 350 ads. Nobody ever got a penny more.
Wow.
Even if they're like, Tom Brady and you just won the Super Bowl, $25,000. Britney Spears did a $5 million Pepsi deal, $25,000. The girls from Friends, $25,000. It didn't matter, $25,000. And it was because it was a health campaign. They were able to sort of like make the argument that this is
Right.
going to be a good thing for America, and it'll be a good thing for you because Annie Liebowitz is taking the photograph,
Yeah.
and it's going to be amazing. And so once it started, like I said, nobody knew what it was going to be. Once it started, everybody wanted to do one because it became the thing. Like it became a pop
Uh-huh.
culture phenomenon from day one. So we started off, we did five. We did Naomi Campbell. We did Christy Brinkley.
Mhm.
We did Iman. We did Natasha Kinsky and Joan Rivers. So
Wow.
it was like women of different ages, women of different fame,
Right.
but all women who
Yeah.
instant recognition. And that was the trick to the campaign was we never put anybody's name in the ad. We wanted people so famous that you wouldn't have to know who is that, you know.
Yeah.
And the only place you could find the name, in fact, was on a little copyright line, just said copyright, Joan Rivers.
Right.
But who doesn't know Joan Rivers, right?
Yeah.
So we did this, and the genius of Chuck Peebler at the agency was we had a gigantic television sized budget for this. Like I said, gigantic money. And he said, you know what? He goes, let's put it all into print. All of it. All of it into print. Now, don't forget, this is 1995.
Yeah.
There were 1,000 magazines.
Uh-huh.
Now it's like there's no magazines.
Right.
There might be some, but I don't know.
Yeah,
You get
there's
one
not a
free
lot
today, it's
left.
right in the garbage, right? But back then, it was a print medium. That's
Hmm.
when photography, unfortunately for photographers, that was when photography was rocking, so
Yeah, I got
photography.
to go to some cool trips back then.
Yeah. So we had ads in every magazine in America for years and years and years. At the beginning, we were running 3-page ads in every magazine. So
Wow.
you'd open the magazine, you'd see Christy Brinkley, turn the page, Joan Rivers, turn the page, Naomi Campbell, boom, 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 both mustaches. And it was such a big startup that everybody was talking about it.
Yeah.
All the late night hosts, they were doing parodies on Saturday Night Live. They were putting milk mustaches into movies. And here's what happened. So our original tagline wasn't "Got Milk" because I remember "Got Milk" was California. We had a tagline on ours that said, because of the idea of surprising nuggets of information from surprising people, the headline on the tagline on ours said "Milk, what a surprise." That
Okay.
was how it was. That was how it was tagged. And what happened is because in California they had Got Milk, right? Only in California. You never saw Got
Right.
Milk anywhere else but California, unless you were in advertising and you saw the award shows. That was it. And so in California, you also had all of entertainment. And so you had Jay Leno on the Tonight Show showing off the milk ads, going, "Hey, you guys see these Got Milk ads with the celebrities with the milk mustache?" And everybody was saying Got Milk ads because in
Yeah.
California, they only knew Got Milk. And so when you would see, like in like a show like Frasier, for instance,
Hmm.
which was a very popular show, there's a
Yeah.
scene where one of the characters has a milk mustache, drinking something, embarrassed, takes the thing away, has a milk mustache, and Kelsey Grammer says, "Got milk?" Like so, they created this like synergy between Got Milk and the milk mustache that didn't exist for real, like it wasn't there.
Wow.
And at about the third or fourth year, um, we were like, you know what? We need to put Got Milk on these ads because everybody calls them Got Milk ads, the Got Milk ads. And so they made a deal with California where they licensed Got Milk from California to run in the national campaign. And at that same time, um, that client that I told you about, the guys who own the cows, the milk mustache campaign was the milk processors, the ones who put the milk into the bottles,
All
sent
right.
them to the stores. The guys who owned the cows had that milk that does a body good thing, but that had run its course.
Right.
And so when this deal was all going down, California was like, well, what do we get out of this? Like, we're just gonna get some money for our tagline, but what can we get out of this? And they said, well, we'll bring in those dairy farmers and maybe they could license your Got Milk work and they could run those nationally on television because we don't care about television. We're just doing print ads. And that's what they did. And so all of a sudden, in Minnesota and in Connecticut and in Florida, you're seeing Got Milk on TV because they did that deal you know,
Wow.
and you see got milk on TV and got milk on the milk mustache ads, and everything was all one campaign because people don't understand that there were different advertisers and different budgets and
Right.
different things that people are trying to do. It's milk.
Right.
And so at that from that point on, everything has got milk on it. And it's all milk mustache and deprivation, which was what California was doing, completely different from the milk mustache. They were doing got milk and that we don't have milk. when you're eating a giant, Oreo and there's no milk.
Oh yeah,
Do
yeah.
you have milk? That was the charm of that campaign. But we weren't doing that because we were supposed to, in every one of our ads, say something educational about milk. So it was like milk will help you grow, milk will help your bones, milk will give you the nutrients you need. Skim milk has the same nutrients as whole milk. Stuff for mostly, like I said, for women at the beginning who are watching their weight or whatever. So you had like, Kate Moss, who was a super thin supermodel talking about bones, how important milk is for osteoporosis. Like, so it's that kind of a thing. So every one of our ads had to carry some weight. But the lifting was done in just a short little copy that was, originally really well written by Jennifer. That was funny and entertaining in itself. So you had the ad with the great photograph, and then you had the copy, which was pithy and fun. And it created this like shot out of the box, phenomenon.
Did you ever
And
have it? Did you
before
ever
you
have
know
a celebrity say no?
some, yeah, but rarely.
Okay.
We got to the point where we were just taking calls rather than making calls.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and then it was a matter of like, we would get the call and it would be like, are we interested in a Joni Loves Chachi reunion ad? It's like, no, thanks. We're gonna pass on that one. So yeah, so we actually had our pickings of like anybody we wanted to do. And then what happened, is after, like I said, this surprising people drinking milk era, which was probably the first, you know, I mean, 8, 9 years of the campaign. At around the 10th year, changes in command at milk and stuff like that happened, and they started getting sensitive to people who were not milk type personalities,
Right.
and we got a little more wholesome. The pics became more, can this person embarrass us somehow? Like we shot Dennis Rodman, and I think the week that his ad was running in national magazines, he kicked like a court photographer in the balls. He
Yeah.
got suspended for like 10 games. And it was like,
Yeah.
they could stomach that back then, but they weren't willing to do it as the campaign got more and more and more successful. Because
Right.
what happens is the noose starts getting tighter, and now you have to like play the game a little bit more,
Hmm.
because people start getting their hands in the cookie jar. When we worked at the very beginning of that campaign, like I said, with Leibowitz and her rules, um, you're a photographer, you shoot a lot of frames. Sometimes you
Yeah.
shoot more than a lot of frames, depending on how hard the assignment is. And at the end, as a photographer on hire, you get a full selection of photographs. You got to work with your team. You got to pick out the ones you think are the best. You got to go to the client. This is our select, but here's some options, that kind of thing.
Yep.
There were no options with Leibovitz. There was
That's what I've
one frame that the client got to see, one frame. And and rightfully so. She said, I don't like options because when I give them options, they pick the option. I don't
heard.
want the option. I want the picture. And even though you think it's impossible, you're a photographer, but the average person might think it's impossible to shoot 350 pictures and pick one. It's not impossible. In fact, it's really possible.
Yeah.
And there's one picture that sometimes is the shit. Like there's one picture that
Yeah.
is the shit. And she and I would work together on picking that frame, and I would take it down and I would lay it in front of the client, and they would go, great. And they did that time after time after
Oh
time after
wow.
time. Yeah, great. Nobody ever said, can I see something else? And that's why, she wanted to do it. And that's why she did continue to do it. And she would have shot the whole campaign if it wasn't for the fact that we started getting into situations where, she, out of 350 ads, I worked with her about 150 times. So
Wow.
that's how many she shot.
Yeah.
Like I said, she should have done them all, but we were running into situations where something was scheduled, somebody had time. It was a big movie set kind of thing. We're shooting, Mike Myers on the set of Austin Powers, and they had a little window, like that kind of thing.
Right.
And you go with her and find that she's booked. You know,
Yep.
and then what do you do, right? So the first time this happened, we had this idea um, to shoot the Super Bowl quarterbacks together
Oh wow.
before the game, before the Super Bowl. So think about that. Nobody's ever done it before
Yeah.
because it's impossible to do. We did it like for 14, 13 years. Um, they play those playoff games. There's 4 teams.
Mm-hmm.
Two of them are going to the Super Bowl. You don't know which one. And
Yeah.
in 2 weeks, the Super Bowl is being played. And so you got to take photographs of each of these guys. They don't They're not together ever. They go to
Right.
separate cities. They go off to their own cities. So you got to shoot these guys separately, and then you have to put them together, and you got to get them into the magazines and the newspapers literally the Friday before the Super Bowl. And so we would go to the airport with tickets for all four cities and wait for the first game. We'd be watching the game in the airport lounge. And when the game was over, we get on that plane first,
Oh,
go to
wow.
that, shoot that guy, and then go to the next city, shoot that guy, come back, pick the pictures, do the engraving, make the mechanicals, get the thing. And we would send the ads to, to USA Today, which was full color, full page,
Oh, yeah.
back page of USA Today. And we would have one ad that ran on Friday before the Super Bowl with both guys in it. And then we would have one ad that ran on Monday after the Super Bowl with the winner in it. And we
Oh,
would shoot all of
right.
that in their 2 weeks. And so an impossible task. And when it happened, people thought it was magic. Like, how in the world could you
Oh,
do this?
sure.
This is
Yeah.
a production, schedule you have to compress into like almost no days. We're like, running film to, to places in, taxis and things.
Yeah.
But the first time that happened, we contacted Annie about doing it, and her studio manager called me and said she's a little bit tight this week. Can we move this? And I'm like, move the Super Bowl? Like, what are you talking about? She goes, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
We can't do it, And so I needed to find another photographer. That was the first time doing the first Super Bowl ad, and I wanted, Annie to do it, and she couldn't do it. So I wanted somebody who was like Annie for sports. And so I picked a guy who was maybe the most celebrated sports photographer in the world, Walter Yost.
Yeah.
He shot more covers for Sports Illustrated than any photographer. I think he has like 5 times more than the next, cover photographer. The greatest sports photographer. He shot some of the catch, the great
Yeah.
photographs.
He's great.
He's amazing. And so he shot that first Super Bowl and almost all of the ones after that. He became like my sports guy. First of all, and he had no idea about sports,
Right.
and she really didn't know how to talk to sports guys, like we were shooting Steve Young, you
Hmm.
know, and this was just for a regular milk ad, and he was in pads like after the idea was it was after a game and he was drinking them, and so he's all sweaty and he's all disheveled and whatever, and they're standing there, and I said we should have like the black on his cheeks, like because he wore it, and some of the players don't, but he did. And
Right.
I said,
Yeah.
let's make him look real authentic, like he's all mussed up from a hard game. And so they're standing around and they're discussing where they should put it, on his face, like over here. And I said, it's not like an Indian thing. It's supposed to be shielding his eyes from like, glare.
Yeah.
And they're discussing this, Annie and the stylist and, the makeup guy. And I said, Steve is right here. Just ask him where he puts it.
Right.
He
Yeah.
said,
That's what I was thinking.
give it to him. They'll put it on.
Yeah.
But she
I
had
was,
no idea. With
uh,
Walter, he shot all these guys. He knew all these guys. He could talk about the game. He could talk about, he was such a guy, like he was a guy,
yeah.
and he was so great with the sports stuff because, and he's, hey, that game, that game on Tuesday, it's like, what game on Tuesday? I don't know what he's talking about.
Right.
But he knew everything, He shot every Super Bowl from Super Bowl one to like, I think just last year was the last time he shot.
Oh,
Like he
wow.
shot every single Super Bowl. So this guy was like Mr. Sports.
Yeah.
So anyway, he did
Absolutely.
these sports ads. So once that happened, once we opened that door to shooting without Annie, anytime we'd have a problem with her schedule and somebody needing to get slugged in, we would go to another guy. And I didn't use Walter for anything but sports, but I got in really good with David LaChapelle, who was a remarkably talented guy himself, and he has a whole different style, obviously, very out there,
Yeah.
very colorful, very wild, and so we did things with him that Annie wouldn't have done, because he was able to concoct these incredible photographs that were multi-layered. Like we shot Jackie Chan hanging from a helicopter with explosions, on the ground, and like Annie wouldn't have been able to figure out how to do that. Like that's
Right.
not her thing, First of all, I
Yeah.
don't think she would have done it. Maybe like, now she would have because she ended up broadening her
Yeah.
her her style, but this is the 1990s. She was doing portraits,
Yep.
and there was a
Did
point.
LaChapelle do the same thing as Annie when it came to the finals? You guys pick out just one shot and present it to the
Yeah,
client?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a little bit more complex because there was a lot of build on David's
Yeah,
stuff,
oh yeah,
you know.
yeah.
And so we would you know remarkably again he would do a lot of the the work, the post work in sets. Like he would actually build giant sets and things. It was amazing.
Also, he
You know,
did
like
a
we
lot of
shot,
that, what they would do in post now, he just did in camera back then.
it was crazy. Like we shot Elton John. I shot with David, and he had two sets built, massive sets. One was he had this idea of Elton in a room, a white room, with a white piano, with a white piece of cake, a white glass of milk, a white chandelier. Like everything's white, except he's wearing like a green and pink Versace suit with
Right.
big polka dots. So the only thing in the picture is like this crazy suit, and everything is white. And he also built a gigantic bigger than life size rocket ship with fire shooting out of the back of it, like a Vargas girl. He
Yeah.
went to sit on the rocket like Rocket Man, and this great painted backdrop with stars. It looked like one of these amazing like Andrew Wyatt, Nancy Wyatt paintings. Like a crazy like thing. And Elton saw it and said, "I'm not getting on the rocket. I don't want to do that," because it was too like phallic, and that's exactly why David wanted to do
That's
it.
really I do
But
it. Yeah.
it was too much for him. So, but we did the other one. But he did these massive sets. They were extraordinary. I wish I had behind the scene pictures, but nobody had a phone in their pocket.
Right. Yeah.
It wasn't the era.
Yep.
There was no like snapshots of stuff. Um, so yeah, so I shot with him a lot, and then there were times when he wasn't available, he wasn't right, and I would go to the other guys, but they were all great photographers. Herb Ritz and Matthew Ralston, and Mark Seliger, and all the guys who do the stuff, that I was doing
Yeah.
um, for editorial. I was using editorial photographers,
If you
because
had to pick one just to shoot, just one of them to shoot whatever, whether it's just a portrait of yourself or say another campaign or something, is there one that you would start off with? And say you're
um,
going to build the campaign, the style of the campaign around that photographer's style. So it's not like we need a certain style. So I'm going to go with Annie because it's a portrait, or I'm going to
right,
go with LaChapelle because it's over the top, colorful, and outrageous. Is there one
yeah.
photographer that you, I don't know, maybe got along with the best or liked the best or just,
I get along with all of them. I mean, there were some higher fashion photographers that I didn't jive with.
did you work with Steven Meisel?
I didn't. No,
All right.
no,
Because I've heard stories about that dude, like he shoots behind like a cover and you just the camera's sticking out and nobody talks to him. And then I've heard,
no. It was just a little too aloof for
heard
me. And
rumors.
what I don't like, what, I'm not going to say anything bad about him because the photograph is incredible.
Yeah.
You could go and see all of these, by the way, because I built a site for the 25th anniversary called milkadman.com,
Okay.
where I uploaded high res images of every single milk ad, and I identified a photographer and the year. It's in chronological order. It's pretty amazing. I did that because I was tired of like I would be in a restaurant talking to somebody about a specific ad, and I would look for it on the internet, and
Yeah.
everybody had the worst scans of these ads. They had shot them with their phone out of a
Right.
magazine, and I'm like, I can't
Yeah.
show the ad. It looks horrible. So I decided I'm going to put them all up. It's my portfolio, and now they're beautiful and they're right there. They're right out there. But it's a cool website in that you can look at every single ad. And I'm doing a thing now where I'm running them in my social media as
Yeah, I
well.
noticed that on LinkedIn. You're putting them up.
Milk Mustache Monday. But
Okay.
we did a we did a book, Milk Mustache book, at about the second year of the campaign, because we found out kids were collecting the ads,
Hmm.
um, and it was through Random House, and it was a New York Times bestseller.
Oh,
And
wow. I believe
so
it.
yeah, yeah, New York Times bestseller. People buying a book about ads. That's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah,
Because people
that's
usually make it
incredible.
through the ad fast, right?
Yeah, you were like the Annie Liebowitz, Herb Ritz of advertising, at
Yeah,
that level. You were
yeah,
not like, every other like photographer who's trying to get to that level or every ad, art director, creative director is trying to get to your level. You have hit the top level where everybody I think everybody wants to be because you're right.
yeah,
Very few people are going to get to the level and do the kind of work that you've done in your lifetime. It's
yeah. In
incredible.
fact, I'll say this. The truth is that I was offered many opportunities to make more money and have bigger jobs and work on different clients. And I went through lots of interviews, and you're always trying to up your game and get a better chance. But I said no to all of them in the end because when I weighed it, it was like I could keep doing this milk thing with all the greatest photographers and the biggest celebrities in a campaign that is worldwide, renowned, or I could work on like, Sony TVs.
Right.
It's like, and then because I've worked on other campaigns, lots of big campaigns. I was working on Merrill Lynch. I shot all around the world. I was in China, I was in
Wow.
Russia, shooting Merrill Lynch. And but I would talk to people about it and go, "What are you working on now?" I said, "I just did this commercial for Merrill Lynch," and they'd be like, "Oh, you know what's cool? The Budweiser frogs." And I'd be like, fuck me.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, all right, seriously?
Yeah, it's like, so now the milk mustache, everybody knows that.
Yeah,
But there was a time when in this business, when you think it's all about you, you find out it's not about you at all.
right.
Nobody cares. But this thing, people know,
Did you
people
get to
know.
take that? Because I noticed on your LinkedIn that you were at one agency, I guess the agency you started with the milk campaign. I can't remember what's on your LinkedIn, what agency it was, but I know you had the milk thing there, and then you went to another agency and you had the milk thing listed on there. So did that go with you from agency to agency, or was that something that had to be worked out? So one agency was like, okay, well, Bernie's gone here, we'll let you guys take over or something like that. How did that play out?
Yeah, I never left the agency. I
Okay.
worked, after, to go back to my history, after the band thing, like Kiss fame,
Yeah.
uh, and Bon Jovi hit it big. He was a few years younger than me, but when he did that, I was like, we're not gonna make any money doing this, boys.
Right.
Lightning's not striking twice in Sayreville, New Jersey.
Yeah.
So we broke up, and that was it. But I did get an opportunity. I worked because I said I could draw. I spent about a year working at Marvel Comics as
Oh,
an inker.
really?
Yeah, when Stan Lee
Wow.
was there on Madison Avenue, it was pretty incredible. So I actually inked a whole bunch of. I was not an inker. I was an inker's assistant, but I inked. What that meant is that the inker who got his name in the comic book would do the main characters, and
Okay.
I would do the backgrounds and minor characters. That's what they called it.
That's
So like
sick.
I'm doing a Spider Woman or something like that, for instance. And so the inker would ink Spider Woman. And if there's a scene where like there's an explosion and stuff flying around, I would do the stuff flying around and the explosion, and I would do people doing like this and stuff falling over and
Right.
like whatever's in the background. And so I wasn't making any money, which wasn't really paying
You
off.
get to meet Stan Lee?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, well, that's pretty cool too.
It was
So,
pretty cool. Like I said, it was the
so you
time.
started out pretty cool.
I did. I had a
Yeah.
lot of I did everything I wanted to do. I just wasn't making any money at it.
Yeah. Yep.
But what the cool thing about it was working at Marvel as an inker, actually touching and this was back in the days when, like photography was all, it was all done analog.
Yes.
There was a
Yep.
piece of Bristol paper. The penciler would actually draw on the paper, and that paper would go to the inker who would have India ink and brushes, and they would actually paint over, the pencil drawings, and then a letterer would go in and paint over and write the lettering on it, and then that would end up going to another person who would take a photostat of it on a big camera with a
Yeah.
plain glass, and then they would color it, and then they would be in a comic book. So the
Wow.
fact that I got to touch those pieces of paper, I would write my name in panels. I would write my brother's name and hey, take a look at Conan, page 66. Names in the background. It's not a book, that kind of stuff. Because nobody knew what I was doing. And I was just like a kid, I was like, hey, let me try to do this. And nobody, figured it out. But I do have a bunch of, comic book pages with people's names written in places where nobody would care about, like on a sign or,
Right.
whatever.
That's pretty cool.
But so I at the time I wasn't making any money. I was going into New York from New Jersey. I ended up getting picked from the bullpen to work specifically with one inker in his penthouse, and he was inking, making a fortune, and I was getting paid peanuts. And I was trying to figure out like how am I going to make a living doing this, and a friend of mine had a job at a graphic design place where they had Conair, the hair dryer
Oh, yeah.
company.
Yeah.
Conair invented the hair dryer, the handheld hair dryer.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, there was a movie
Okay.
called Hairspray with Goldie Hawn and um, what's his name, Warren Beatty,
Oh, okay.
and it has the first hair dryer in it. It's like we did make him out of
Really?
wood.
Oh, wow. I had
But
no
anyway, they had
idea.
Conair, and they said they need somebody who can draw pictures of the girls holding curling irons and stuff because nobody knows how to do it. And so I was like, oh, I can do that. So I went over there and I used to draw, the pictures for the instruction books of the girls, holding their
Oh
curling iron.
yeah, yeah.
And my first claim to fame, and this is a very big deal. I think to this day you can still find this drawing on product because it looks like it's been photographed a bazillion times. But I drew the photograph, the artwork, the original artwork of the bathtub and the hair dryer and the big X over it that says "Don't put it."
Really? That's you?
That was me. And I don't know if it's still there, but I've seen it like, in places where I'm like, oh, that's my artwork. I guess it got adopted or adapted or whatever the word is, but you can find it on almost every hair dryer. Picture of the hair dryer and a bathtub and a big like,
That's so great. My only claim to fame is I was dating a girl who was opening a clothing store, and she was like, "Here's what I'm thinking." So I sketched out like a body torso thing. And next thing I know, it's on her sign outside her store, which I didn't know was
oh.
going to happen. And basically, it's just a store for strippers to go buy clothes. So that's what I don't know.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Yeah,
You could
I'm
go
gonna
by
have
there.
to
Is, have you seen that
advertise
sign?
that.
Call me.
Yeah.
So I went from that place to realizing that was kind of a dead end, just drawing pictures of girls holding hair dryers and stuff.
Yep.
So then an opportunity opened up at a local New Jersey advertising agency. They were they were called Bozell and Jacobs, and they were looking for an art director. I didn't really know what an art director was. I could draw. That was all I knew. And so this guy hired me, Lee Rosemont, who was the creative director there, hired me just because he liked me. And he was excited that I worked at Marvel Comics. He used to call me Captain Marvel, even though Captain Marvel had nothing to do with Marvel Comics. But he liked me
Yeah.
and he gave me a break. And that agency, Bozell and Jacobs, was the same Bozell that I was in New York. I got transferred to New York that created the Milk Mustache campaign. And that agency then became Low, and that became Deutsch, and then
Oh,
that became,
okay.
Campbell Ewald. And I never left agencies. I'd stay from that first job when I was in my early 20s to the day that they let me go, because that's what happens.
Yeah.
They lost the account and they let me go.
Yep.
Um, I was at one place my whole
Wow.
career. Yeah.
That's
Now, I could
incredible.
have like jumped around and made a lot more money, but it wasn't about money for me. It was the thing I did.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Foolish
doesn't
me.
happen anymore. Yeah, everybody's so where you're at now, the cause place, how did you get there?
About 25 years ago, the creative director from the agency I was working with that I did the Milk Mustache campaign for had an opportunity to work on some kind of new assignment that was a public service campaign for something called the Foundation for a Better Life.
All right.
And the advertising was going to be just fun, the purpose of it was to just give people an opportunity to lift themselves up, if they're feeling down, or to give them motivation if they need a push, or to help them feel better about the world if they're feeling a little bit depressed. And every ad, it's a billboard campaign. Mostly, there's a television component as well, but it was originally just a billboard campaign. Is to just give people this lift, in their day. And the campaign is somebody on one side, a photograph of somebody, a legend, a current celebrity, or an everyday person, and a message of hope or opportunity or determination, and a little value box that says hope, pass it on, determination, pass it on. And if you go to airports, you'll see them. If you go to passiton.com and you'll see the ads.
All right.
But basically, it's been running now for 25 years, and it was just named by the Outdoor Advertising Association as the most successful campaign in the history of outdoor advertising.
Oh, wow.
It's literally everywhere. Now that I pointed you to it, you'll see them everywhere. As an example, we have a photograph of Albert Einstein on one side, and we have a headline on the other side with a value. And so the headline says, "As a student, he was no Einstein." And then it says
Okay.
determination, pass it on. Because the truth of Albert Einstein was he was a rotten student, but that's because he was smarter than the rest of the class. But it's things like that. And so the current campaign has, it has William Shatner, it has Dolly Parton, it has Dr. Jane Goodall, and messages of similar, inspiration for people in their
I
daily
have
life.
seen that. Yeah, now that you gave me the tagline with the determination pass, I was like, yeah, okay, I remember
Yeah,
seeing that now.
so we do these. I've been doing this for a very long time, And when I left the agency, my partner and I, copywriting partner, Ron Wachino, and I, an account guy, started an agency called Lean and Mean. So Lean and Mean was just basically the three of us with partners, outside partners if we needed, art buyers and production people and stuff like that, to continue on with clients and work. And so that's the main thing I'm still affiliated with. The
Uh-huh.
cause place is is an opportunity that Ron and I identified as looking for um, groups, organizations that need to hone their messaging that are trying to do good things, like the
Okay.
Foundation for Better Life. So using that as like a bridge, we get a lot of requests from potential clients who say we really like that work for the foundation. We want you to do something like that for us, and that's an opportunity to maybe harness some of that work because we've gotten really good at public service and really good at motivating people to help, to donate, to build hospitals and do things like that. And so it's just kind of like an opportunity to get involved with advertising in a way that you may not necessarily have the ability to do in any other way. So we in my career, with all of the things I've sold with advertising, the stuff that's the most I think precious to me is work that motivates people to do things, especially for causes.
Yeah.
You know, I did some work early on for the International Rescue Committee, for instance, that when there's a refugee situation in the world, they're the first ones in, boots on the
Oh,
ground.
wow.
If you hear that the Red Cross is there, the International Rescue Committee is there first. They're the ones who don't go in with any PR. It
Okay.
was founded, ironically, we're talking about Albert Einstein. It
Yeah.
was founded by Albert Einstein. There's a
Really?
say, who started it to help Jews get out of Nazi Germany during World War II.
Oh,
And
wow.
it continues to this day, and it's a really amazing group. And so I can't put a helmet on and a backpack and run to a situation where there's a natural disaster or a war or something
Yeah.
like that. But I can make an ad,
Yeah.
and when you make an ad, you can raise funds, which helps those people who have to go there with supplies and manpower and help. And it's such a humbling thing to turn your skills into a useful tool for humanity. And even more humbling that after doing that, sitting up, in my office, with my feet up in a, legal pad, writing ideas down, to being at, an awards dinner where I'm getting a medal from them with Cristiano Amanpour, who is on the ground in
Wow. Yeah.
Zimbabwe or whatever, and I'm there. I made an ad, but they recognize the importance of the work that you do when you're not
Hmm.
on the ground, and it's a very cool thing. So the cause place is an opportunity that we hope will help, find other like-minded organizations that are looking to do similar things.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
That's great.
there's a lot going on. I always said to my wife that, like, if there's ever a time when I'm not doing something, it's probably time to check my pulse.
Right. So would you have like advice for anybody growing up who's wanting to be an art director or who's just getting into this business who wants to be a creative director to make it to a bigger agency, a national agency like Deutsch or BBDO or, wherever? Is there any kind of advice that you would give that maybe you learned along the way that you think would be best for them to follow, or is it just good luck to you?
Yeah, no, here's the advice that I've given to young people my whole career because it's advice that I held dear to me when I was starting out, and not only starting out, but to this day. And the advice is make everything great. So if you have that mindset of making everything great, there's no bad project. There's no project beneath you. There's not something that nobody else wants to work at on the agency, and they're throwing it at you because you're like the low-lying, resources that they just take advantage of because everybody else wants to go home and they need you to do this overnight.
Right.
Make everything great means that you could take a matchbook cover um, and enter it in Cannes and win an award because nobody cares about the media, nobody cares about the assignment, nobody cares about how much time you had or how hard you have to work on it.
Right.
All they care about is the idea. And if you make everything great, you have an opportunity. You have an opportunity to do something amazing, something for your book, something for a client, something for an agency to look at you and say, what's this guy working on? Because I need somebody this good to be working on this other thing. But it's really great motivation. And that way you're working for yourself all the time.
Yeah.
You're always working for yourself. Make something for your book, even if it's the crappiest assignment you've ever seen. You know, somebody wants you to do a PowerPoint, make it great. The great thing about today's environment versus when I was doing my, work in my heyday is that there was such an onus on the work back then. I'm doing a commercial that's going to run with the Super Bowl. Big responsibility.
Yeah.
You're making an ad that's got a $3.5 million media buy. Big, giant responsibility. Like you can't screw it up. And if you're worried you're going to screw it up, you will screw it up because
Right.
because worrying about it is like a creative director one time told me this. He said an idea is like a snowball passed among warm hands. The more people that touch it before you throw it, the less that it's going to have when it's in the air. And
Yeah.
that's the truth. So you can't worry about things so much that you ruin it. So the problem with doing things back then versus doing things now is everything mattered. Now, nothing real. There's no media. You could do social media, you could do an ad every day, and nobody remembers yesterday's ad.
Yeah.
And so you could take chances every single day on every single project and not have the big ramifications of thinking, oh my gosh, I'm doing a $250,000 photo shoot.
Right.
Do we have it? It's like, I don't know. You better know.
Yeah.
I was shooting with Mary Ellen Mark, talk about great photographers, and she's fantastic. Mary Ellen Mark, look her up if you don't know who she is. She's an amazing,
absolutely.
lifestyle, incredible editorial photographer, one of the greatest, very artistic. And this was during the time when, there's no digital. The only one who sees the frame is her. Same thing with most of the stuff that I worked on. You would shoot like, I pulled these things here. Annie Liebowitz would shoot on her Mamiya 6.7
Mhm.
and put a Polaroid back on it and do a Polaroid, right?
Yeah, you get
So
a
and she
Polaroid.
fold
That's it.
to make it look like the ad page,
Right.
and that was it, right? And then when she shot, nobody saw the picture but her,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
she doesn't even see the picture because when the shutter goes black,
Yeah.
that's
You don't know what you got. Yeah.
that's the
Oh,
picture.
absolutely.
So I'm shooting with Marilyn and Mark, and she's shooting 35, on a hill with a bunch of kids. And we brought in casting. We had kids on the hill, and it's for an insurance company.
Okay.
Beautiful. We're supposed to get beautiful, father-daughter moment, with kids and stuff. And that's what her forte was, like these beautiful moments. And she's shooting, and we're done. We're done with the shoot. And I go, so what do you think? And she goes, I said, do we have it? And she goes, I'm not sure. No, she's the photographer.
Right.
I said, you're not sure.
Yeah.
If you're not sure,
Wow.
no, I'm not sure.
What'd you
He
do
said, well, I don't know
then?
what I'm going to do because, the kid wasn't that great. I go, well, let's get some other kids. We're in Central Park. Go send your guy over there to get those kids. Bring those
Yeah.
kids over. Because I'm not sure it doesn't wrap the shoot.
No. No.
Doesn't wrap the shoot if you're not sure. So now there's not the onus of taking the responsibility and having you come back and go, we don't have it. Like, oh, actually, we don't have it, and now you're screwed. Now everything you do is really disposable. It's all disposable. Goes away. Nobody ever sees it unless you save it and stick it on your portfolio website. Nobody will ever see it again.
And what's
But
interesting
you
now
do a
is you
lot of
shoot
work.
more than you ever shot when you were shooting film. So if you're trying to get that one shot, normally you would have shot two, maybe three rolls of film to get it and be like, we probably got it, or you're sure you got it. Even now, if I'm shooting, I can do 20 shots, go, got it. They
Yeah.
still want me to shoot another 100 frames or more sometimes. Just
Right,
because,
right,
well, maybe
right.
we could get it
Safety.
better, and it's digital. So they just want you to just keep shooting and shooting.
Yeah. Do you fall into the trap? You have to give them everything you shoot. You're shooting for
Sometimes.
hire.
There's sometimes
It's
that
the
just give
worst,
us
right?
all, and what I hate is when they go, give me all the raws.
Yeah.
Like, or they're like, can you dump this onto a hard drive before you leave and give it to us
Yeah.
before we leave? And then I'm having to have my DT over there, like, make adjustments on here as quick as you can, save them as DNG files. So at least my adjustments are made to them. And
Right.
so if they screw them up later, I can go, look, here's what I gave you. I had already made the adjustments to it because I did it when I first started shooting digital years ago. The art director was like, I shoot as well. I shoot this little catalog. I know how to work with, raw files. Please give me all the raws. I said, okay. And I gave her all the raws. She just
Yeah,
immediately converted them to JPEGs and sent them to her VP of marketing. So of course the VP of marketing was like, what is this hell?
yeah,
These are all flat and And so then I
yeah,
had to go back and here's how they should look. And I adjusted
yeah,
all of them and sent them back. I was like, here's what
yeah,
they, if she'd let me send them to you the way I want to. So yeah, I
yeah.
fall into that trap
I mean,
occasionally.
digital is a boon, but like when I started, it was all Chrome.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. That's what I was
everybody was
shooting.
shooting Chrome, and it was very, very difficult because you could be like a quarter stop off, and it's not salvageable in a real
Yeah.
good way.
Yeah.
So like with Leibowitz especially, she was very, very on her game when it came to the exposure. In
Hmm.
fact, she would do clips throughout the
Yeah.
shoot. You would run to the lab and come back and report you're on the right exposure. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, and she shot Chrome until they stopped making the stock that she used. It was a specific Ektachrome that she shot. It was a 6.7.
Yeah.
And when they stopped making it, she sent her crew all around the world to buy up as much of the film as she can and refrigerate it because she didn't want to have to shoot on anything else. And then
Okay.
from that, because remember, this is still the 2000s,
Yeah.
after that, she went to negative with a lot of like, trepidation.
Hmm.
But she ended up liking negative because she could then control the color in the prints.
Yeah.
And when I would go, when we would make a select, I would go over to her studio and she would print like the image literally like 60 times. And there would be 60 prints on the floor. And 16 by 20 prints, big giant prints,
That's
because you have to
wow.
scan them and make them into an ad all over the floor and trying to pick the right color. And it's like this one's a little more sallow, and this one is a little bit more red, and this one is a little more green. And it was an incredible process.
Yeah.
And then when digital came in and she embraced digital, everything changed. And the thing about it is, as you're talking about RAWs, her profile is probably worth $1 million. Like you would see the raw go up, and then her profile kick in, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden it was a Leibowitz photograph. Like it was
Right.
like amazing. Like she does this thing in studio where her skin tones are warm,
Hmm.
and the background is always a little bit cool to greenish.
Yeah.
Like even if it
Yeah.
was even if it was a middle gray, it would go a little bit because it's like a complementary sort of thing that it pops the skin off.
Yeah.
You're thinking to yourself, you want it warm, but what you end up getting is something that's more dynamic because the coloration does something to the features of the face that
That's true.
it looks
Yeah.
different than the actual set, but it has that Rembrandt thing that she does.
Yeah.
And then when she goes outside, a whole different thing happens because, for her, a great day is the worst day. Like
Hmm.
a great day for a photograph is the worst day for a photograph. The cloudiest, it looks like it's going to rain day is the
Right.
day that she gets the best photograph because that day is that gray backdrop.
Yeah.
And
That's
then the
true.
flash is the warm skin tone. And so it's an amazing thing. Like it's everybody copies it now, but of course she did that. That was her thing. Like that was her invention. And the funny thing about it is that when she was shooting, so many people followed her that I think they followed her equipment and her techniques.
Hmm.
Because I know that at a time, everybody was shooting Chrome.
Yeah.
Everybody in the business, that's all you can get. And then when she started shooting negative, everybody switched to negative.
Really?
And it was almost like, well, she's doing it. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Everybody was shooting, House of Lots, and then all of a sudden everybody went to Mamaya's. It was like,
Well, I have to admit, when I was looking for a new digital camera, I looked up some Annie Liebowitz stuff and
yeah,
some others, and I was looking at it and I was like, well, Annie's shooting with this camera. Maybe because I was already considering, I was like trying to decide between two different cameras, and I
right.
looked and I saw she was shooting with one, and I was like, okay, well, maybe, I can go with that. And maybe it was, I can't remember who the other photographer was I was looking at, but it was the same kind of deal. I was like, what's that one shooting with?
Yeah, I'll give you my little wrap up on her because there's a lot of things you read about her being difficult, and I work with her a lot.
Yeah,
You have to understand what she's doing. She's not difficult at all. She's a genius,
yeah,
and she's harder on herself than she is on anybody who says that she's hard on them. And that's sort of the trick to it. But I came away with from my experience of working with Annie Leibovitz with this insight. Anybody can be a genius. And it's true.
Yeah.
Anybody can be a genius. And here's how you do it. It's hard to do, but here's how you do it. You find out something that you're good at, and you drive your entire life force into it at the exclusion of everything else, at the exclusion of being patient, at the exclusion of being able to talk about the weather with somebody because they want to talk about the weather, at the exclusion of caring about somebody's personal problems, at the exclusion of everything. You get inside that box that is the frame of your camera and you live in there at the
Yeah.
exclusion of everything else. And I'm sure Leonardo da Vinci was probably thought of as being hard to work with. I mean, it's a thing, but it's absolutely true. Like people who are geniuses, they don't have a full set of interpersonal skills,
Right.
um, because they're compressing everything that they've got into their ability. You know,
Yeah.
and if you think about it from that perspective, you won't call somebody like Annie Liebowitz difficult.
Well, that makes sense. I
You'll
mean,
recognize what she's doing.
I've heard the same thing about LaChapelle, that the story I heard most recently was J.C. Penney hired him for a shoot. This was years ago. And they were trying to tell him how to shoot. And he
Mhm.
sent everybody off set except for his assistants and whoever he was shooting.
Yeah.
And it made sense because my first thought was, why the hell would J.C. Penney hire LaChapelle to shoot? That's those two things just don't compute in my head. But what you said, I mean, makes complete sense. That yeah, I mean, you hired him, he's a genius at what he does, and then you just step back and let him do their thing.
Yeah, he is a fun guy, and his shoots are the most fun of any shoot I've ever been on. He puts on like a whole production, like and I'm not talking about what's in front of the camera. I'm talking about everything going on the set. He
Yeah.
hires DJs.
Somebody
There's
told
like
me that they were shooting in where were they? They were shooting down in Soho. And this is
yeah,
from a creative director, and they were working on something, and there was a shot they needed to get, and he was just like, "Come on, let's go!" And he was like dressed like a woman or something. They were walking down Soho, and he was finding what he needed to shoot and started shooting. She said it was amazing. It came out so incredible.
yeah. He's a real talent, and he's a really nice guy too. He really is super sweet and super nice. And but man, what an imagination he has.
Oh yeah,
It's the kind of things that you see now when you go into a Mid-Journey and you ask it to make
right.
a AI picture.
He's already
That's what
done it.
LaChapelle was doing in camera, like
Yeah,
20, 30 years ago. He's doing AI before there was AI.
right. Yeah, that's you're right. He does a lot of that. That was amazing.
Yeah.
What about Herb Ritz? How was he?
Herberts was also a really amazing guy. He was sweet and very, very nice. And I shot him. I used him to shoot a photograph in black and white for the Milk campaign. And he because that's his thing.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but he was a different kind of a photographer because he was a fashion photographer.
Hmm.
So it was a little bit of a different approach, to doing
Right.
it. But I only worked with him one time, but it was a nice experience. He was cool.
Yeah.
Um, and you know the truth is that there's a lot of different styles, but I think that well, every photographer who's at that caliber, at that height of their career, um, just knows how to do what they do.
Yeah.
One time, just to get a little bit more into Annie's mindset, is that she was sitting on the floor of the set, with her head in her hand and one of the Polaroids, and she's looking over a couple of things. And I was like worried that something was up. So I went over and I said, everything okay? And she said, I'm just trying to work this out. And I said, well, I think it looks good. You gotta be careful what you say to her because sometimes you can set her off. I
Right.
said, I think it looks good. And he goes, well, you're looking at it from a different perspective than I am. She says, I'm looking at it from the perspective of every time I take a photograph, I think about people being able to say, remember when she was good.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. A
Now,
lot of pressure.
I don't know that you I don't know that you would ever think that on an advertising assignment when like the next week you're going to shoot the Queen of England or something. But
Right.
for her, every assignment was that. It was everything was all the big stuff. Like, and that's why I think that, that she is so great at what she does is that she really labored over stuff. Sometimes we would shoot somebody in like, in I think we shot Tony Bennett, and I think she didn't even finish a roll before she said we got it. You know,
Wow.
um, the funny thing about that story was that, Tony Bennett sits down and the first thing he does is he goes like this. like
Oh,
like
yeah.
like lost it, like Bill Murray lost the translation. He
Yeah.
goes like this, and Andy goes over, he goes, Tony, we don't do this.
That's
We
great.
do like the rap talk, you know?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, we've been going at this for a little while. It's been amazing. And you've answered just about everything I was going to ask, pretty much.
Hopefully you can edit it into some kind of a, you know,
I do have
flow.
one question I
I
ask.
ramble a lot because I got a lot of stories built
It's
into what I do.
great. No, I think we could talk forever.
Yeah. Just like when they do like those news interviews, just get some B-roll of you going like this. So you can find some edit points,
Just
you
so I
know?
can have me in there every once in a while.
Yeah. Always those shots of like,
Yeah. Yeah, I love it when the client sends me stuff like, hey, edit this together. And I'm looking at it and going, oh my God, this interview. And, luckily I learned years ago that when I'm shooting, it's like interview them first and then shoot my B-roll afterwards. Because when I first
right,
did it,
right.
like, let's go shoot B-roll. And then we interviewed and we were leaving right after that. And then I go to
Yeah.
edit and I'm like, I don't have the right B-roll for what they're talking about. And I need to edit this here. What am I dropping in? So then I'm like on the computer looking for stock crap I can just drop in that fits whatever they're talking about.
Yeah, it's another thing. Like as an art director, you always have to be aware of. Not that it matters any much today, because with generative fill and stuff like that, you can get rid of anything.
Oh yeah.
I could put you in a different place and it look like you're really there. It's amazing. But in the old days, 3 years ago,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
available. In the old days, you had to make sure when you were done with the shoot that you shot the set without anybody on it.
Right.
Just you had to. Just because you never know whether you're gonna have to move something or change something or adjust something. And if you don't have that, you can't go back and get it. Not
Nah.
with the lighting, not with the set, not with even something as simple as a piece of gray seamless paper. Like the way the light casts on it, you can't recreate it. There's no way to really make it work.
Right.
Now, you
And
don't
you
need
got to
it.
make sure your focal point's about the same, as close as
Mhm.
possible to what you shot before. Otherwise, I knew guys who would shoot and they would do that, but then they didn't remember where they shot it, so they would just adjust the lens, and then yeah,
Yeah,
that's
then your background's at a different focus than the
yeah.
background of the shot. Yeah.
Or they would focus on the background when all the other shots it's out of focus. So then you got to go in and post and fix that on top of it as well. But so the last question I usually ask everybody is, what is the most unusual or strangest thing that's happened to you in your career where you're just like, wow, I can't believe that happened, or somehow we made it through that even though this did happen, that kind of a thing.
Hmm. Um,
And
well, here's
it's
the thing.
literally gone from like people saying, "Oh, just being asked to be on here," which I'm like, "Oh, thank you,"
Yeah.
to we were out someplace, in the middle of South America somewhere, and we had gas cans on the trucks, and we didn't lock them up that night, and woke up the next morning, and we got to our location and found out there was no gas in the gas cans because somebody stole it all.
Yeah, here's a good story for you, and it's a milk mustache story.
Cool.
So I'm shooting Rebecca Romaine.
Hmm.
Rebecca
Oh yeah.
Romaine's famous, I guess now, but Rebecca Romaine when she was just like a super hot model.
Yep.
And the idea was, we would shoot celebrities. We didn't want them to reinvent themselves when we did ads. They had to be who they were known for because, like I said, we're not identifying them with their name. So we're shooting Rebecca Romaine, and we're shooting her in a bikini on a beach in New Jersey. And you're doing a celebrity shoot. These are very expensive shoots, lots of people, lots of crew. It's a TV shoot basically with Leibowitz. So you've got everything. You've got trailers, you've got star trailers, you've got all the equipment, you've got the rigs, you've got light packages, you got everything. And we're all on the beach in New Jersey. And we're setting up this shot. Rebecca Romaine in a bikini on the beach. And I've sold this to the client with a little drawing that I did.
Right.
And so we're there. And Annie comes over to me and she goes, how many times have you seen a picture of a beautiful woman in a bikini on a beach? And I was like, oh no. I'm thinking, oh no. I said, a lot? She goes, a lot. I said, well, what are you recommending? She goes, let's take her out of here. Let's put her someplace else. And I'm like, where?
Yeah.
She goes, let's take her to Times Square. Let's shoot her in a bikini in Times Square. And I'm like, how do we do that? She said, well, just grab the crew, grab a couple of lights, we'll just go into the city and we'll do it. I said, don't we need like permits or something?
Yeah.
She goes, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. And so we get into a van, Rebecca Romaine, a couple of assistants, a bunch of lights, camera, Annie. We drive to Manhattan, right in front of where MTV used to be, that Times
Oh
Square
yeah, yeah,
place
yeah.
where their intersection is, probably the busiest place in New York City. On the street corner, she sets a camera up. We have no permit. There's no permit.
Right. Yeah.
Sets a camera up, gets some little, some, soft boxes, put them in, got the power. Rebecca Romaine jumps out of the van and pulls off her overcoat, super sexy in a bikini in the middle of the most busy spot in New York. The whole place goes crazy. Everybody stops. Cops are like, walking over like just mayhem. And she jumps out of the car, and we were taking these pictures of her standing in the middle of Times Square in this bikini. That's the photograph that ran for her ad, her in a bikini in Times Square. And not only did it run in the ad, it ran in the Daily News. It was in People Magazine. It
Oh
was in the New York
wow.
Post because it was a gigantic scene. And when the police came over and said, "Where's your permit?" He goes, "We have it. Just hold on, talk to her." And they were just like doing the runaround until Annie got the shot.
Right.
But can you imagine? Just
Wow.
unbelievable. Yeah,
That's
crazy.
amazing. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
shot in uh the park, with Central Park without a permit once, but I didn't have lights, so we had literally like a reflector and a scrim, and we would drop it on the ground. I'll sit there when the cops came by or security came by, or whatever, and then pretend. But to go into Times Square with all the lights and then to run the
yeah.
cops around, that's amazing. That's a
I
great
just remember,
story.
like, in one of the interviews, one of the magazines or on the news on TV or whatever, they were talking to a cabbie, and they were like, what do you think about this disruption today? And he goes, "Who cares?" Like,
It's
that's part of my
Rebecca
day.
Romaine.
Yeah, this made my day.
God, you got some
But yeah,
great
so now
stories.
again to my client, I
Yeah, how'd
had to
that
like,
work out?
had to make a phone call and say, "Hey, we're doing this," and they were like, "Okay." You know, So anyway, anything else?
No, that's it, Bernie. Thank you so much. This is amazing.